right, welcome everybody. It looks like we are getting started. So glad to be with all of you. I am Rosie Ward, and I'm excited to be your tour guide for the next bit of time. And so we're going to start out with a check-in. We're going to go out to a site called Mentimeter or Menti. And when you go out to menti.com, you can either open up a second browser or you can use your smartphone. You will see an opportunity to put in a code that you see on your screen. It is 2038-8193. And so you know you're in the right spot. Once you put that code in, there's going to be a little check-in question with different faces asking you to check in of how you are feeling today. If you see that, you are in the right spot. So I'll keep this up for a few more seconds, and then I'm going to go over to the live feed of the Mentimeter poll. So again, if you're just joining us, open up a second browser or your smartphone and go to menti.com and put the code in you see on your screen, 2038-8193. And again, you will see an opportunity to check in with how you are doing today. So I am going to head over there as well and see how everyone is today. So here we go. Oh, we got a few people checking in. This is awesome. We'll let you all see how your colleagues are doing from around the globe. So again, if you're just joining us, you want to go to menti.com, and the code is now at the top of your screen, 2038-8193. So we have some people who are feeling kind of meh today. We've got a lot of people that are doing pretty good. Again, we'll give it about 30 more seconds for people to check in, and then we're going to actually do a poll question. So this is just to get us warmed up, make sure everyone can get to the site. All right, so again, if you are just joining us, you want to go open up a second browser or your smartphone and go to menti.com. And then you're going to put the code in that you see on the top of your screen right here, 2038-8193, and you will see an opportunity to check in like you see on your screen. So we'll give it a few more seconds, and then we will go to our next question. So again, we're doing pretty good. We don't have any. We do have someone who's kind of meh today. Sorry for that. Hope you're taking care of yourself. Again, there's no right or wrong. It's just an opportunity to check in of where you are and how you're doing. So as we do that, in the interest of getting going, want to start out by seeing what your thoughts are on the future of leadership. So Dr. Brené Brown, who's best-selling author and researcher, is now more than 12 years into research on leadership globally, and has interviewed by this point thousands of C-suite executives in all kinds of industries, and has asked this question of what does the future demand from leadership? Who is still going to be standing in 5 years? So is it patience and adaptability? Is it emotional intelligence and resilience? Is it brave leaders and courageous cultures? Or is it effective communication and flexibility? So put in your response. And again, if you just joined us, you're opening up a second browser or your smartphone and going to menti.com. If you put the code in 2038-8193, you will have an opportunity to put in your answer. All right, they're coming in hot. All right, well, we're neck and neck. We're neck and neck, emotional intelligence and resilience, effective communication. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds and see who comes in. All right, so we have effective communication and flexibility that is rising to the top. Okay, all right, keeps coming to the top. So let's see who is correct. And hate to tell you, but nobody is. The answer is brave leaders and courageous cultures. However, I will say that effective communication and flexibility, emotional intelligence and resilience, and patience and adaptability are all partially correct because they are part of a side effect, if you will, of what it means to have brave leaders and courageous cultures. So we have one correct answer. So let's unpack this a little bit. I'm going to go back into the slides for today. And by the way, I will provide a PDF handout of these slides for those of you who are interested. So you don't have to be feverishly taking notes if you don't want to. So why does the future demand braver leaders and courageous cultures? Well, first I want to unpack some definitions to make sure we're on the same page. There are a lot of definitions of leadership out there. Many are very similar to this one. This is how we define leadership. That at its core, it's about us maximizing our positive impact on the world by doing two things. The first is doing the work necessary to become our best, fully authentic self. This is really the braver leaders part, and I'll unpack that a little bit further. And then the courageous cultures part comes in by us supporting those around us to break past barriers and step into their greatness. And here's why this is important. Here's why we need to think about leadership in this capacity, where everybody really has an opportunity to show up as a leader, regardless of their title or role. Because we live, work, and lead in a world where disruption is the normal. And we like to use this acronym VUCA because it helps us put language to what we're experiencing. And as human beings, when we can't name something, it's hard for us to understand and process it. So VUCA gives us language to go, oh, yep, disruption, uncertainty, complexity, volatility is the name of the game. And this was long before the pandemic. And the last couple of years have really brought us VUCA to the extreme. Here's the predicament. That disruption can bring a lot of great things. This is where we have technological advancements and research and medical breakthroughs, and we learn about greater ways to do things more efficiently and more effectively, and we learn and grow and evolve, all really good things that are not possible without disruption. At the same time, as human beings, we are basically hardwired from a young age to seek out familiarity and to seek out comfort, to maximize reward and minimize discomfort. And a VUCA world is anything but comfortable. So we have this gap, we have this discrepancy that we have to reconcile between what the world is demanding of us and our own human biology or our own human DNA. Another way I like to think about this is that when we are leaning into the discomfort of a VUCA world, it's like stepping into an arena. We use the arena as a metaphor to describe those moments or those experiences where we are showing up fully and we can't control the outcome. Meaning we might be sharing our idea or saying I don't have the answers or asking for help, or we might be saying, giving difficult feedback or anything like that. And we don't know if we're going to be subjected to judgment or criticism or rejection or retaliation. In other words, when we show up and we can't control the outcome, we are hugely vulnerable. Vulnerability is defined as those emotions we experience when we are faced with uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And I ask this to groups all the time. And if we were in person, I would invite you to raise your hands of, were you raised to some degree to believe that vulnerability is a weakness? And I would include myself in that, but most people say, yeah, to some degree, it was like not a good thing. What's ironic about that is that I challenge you to try to think of one example of courage, either that you've expressed or witnessed in your life, big or small, that did not involve uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure. My guess is you can't do it because what we've learned over the past 12 plus years is that there actually is no courage without vulnerability. They're not opposite ends of the spectrum, or they're not opposite sides of the coin. They're one and the same. The predicament is that vulnerability looks like strength and courage in someone else, but it feels like weakness in us. It's the first thing I look for in other people, but it's the last thing I want to show you. And why this is so important is that if you think about in our VUCA world, there is vulnerability left and right everywhere we turn. There are these arena moments everywhere we go. And imagine that you are faced at the entry of that arena and you're trying to decide, do I or don't I? Your colleagues are trying to decide, do I speak up and actually say I have a concern? Do I actually share my idea? Do I give this feedback, right? It's you and everyone around you is in this do I or don't I? And when we're faced with whether or not we're going to step into that arena, a whole host of vulnerable based emotions show up. We have shame, that voice that says you're not enough, or that who do you think you are? We've got scarcity, we've got fear, we have anxiety, uncertainty, all of these things that we don't want to feel that are cringy. And so we learn very early in life how to protect ourselves. If I don't want to look stupid, don't speak up and don't ask a question. If I don't want to be in a position, just kind of stay out of the way. If I don't want to appear selfish, don't advocate for my needs. We learn these super young in life. We learn how to protect ourselves or armor up. And really what we're trying to do is control that feeling of vulnerability. And we see this happen in workplaces all over the place. So people start either withdrawing and tapping out, or they start getting nitpicky and controlling and domineering. And a lot of it's not even conscious or intended, but when you add a whole bunch of us together in a workplace or a community, trying to control this feeling of vulnerability, trying to avoid rising to the demands of a VUCA world, it's hugely problematic. And what we also fail to realize is that, yes, vulnerability can be the birthplace of these unsettling emotions, but it's also the birthplace of love, belonging, and joy, and all these other things. So those of you that said resilience and emotional intelligence, those are part of it, right? You can't have innovation and creativity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and empathy and trust and problem solving and all of these things without people being willing to set down their armor and step into that arena, right? But we have to make it safe for people to do that. And so I give all of this as context because I want to spend a few minutes now unpacking why the future demands this, and a trend that has actually been building for quite some time now that really further supports why our world needs braver leaders and courageous cultures. And as I do that, I invite you to keep in mind what many of us might be familiar with is the parable of the boiling frog, or what Peter Senge calls the biggest learning disability in organizations. That if we take a frog and we put it into a pot of boiling water, it leaps out immediately because frogs are hardwired to respond to dramatic threats in their environment. However, if you take a frog and you put it in room temperature water and you slowly, incrementally increase the temperature, at each increase, the frog will adapt. And then it will over time become more and more lethargic, where it won't even try to escape, because frogs are not programmed to respond to subtle changes in their environment. And why Peter Senge says this is the biggest learning disability is because as human beings and organizations, we wait till we're in hot water before we do something. We ignore the subtle trends. We ignore the leading indicators. We ignore the qualitative data that's been building. We ignore the signs. And then suddenly we're in hot water and it becomes crisis. And the signs have been building for a long time. This is not because of the pandemic or because VUCA to the extreme. If you go back to 2015, Ron Friedman did a bunch of research from the Great Places to Work Institute and those organizations. And he stated that we have to start to create environments that help people fuse their personal and professional life to be a whole human being so they can deliver their best work. This was before hybrid work was a big thing. This was before pandemic. That was back in 2015. Building on that, every year, Deloitte does a human capital trends survey globally of over 10,000 executives and HR professionals and really looks at what's happening. And a couple of years later, in 2017, after Ron Friedman's book came out, they started to describe a big shift that was happening, really saying that we have to rethink outdated, rigid corporate hierarchy structures. And we have to let go of old paradigms and embrace new ways of thinking about our people, about our workplace, about our structure, and really our role in larger global social issues. And then in 2018, this expanded to the rise of the social enterprise. And then in 2019, they started describing how organizations needed to have a more human focus, and that they found that organizations really needed to start to make work meaningful and give people a sense of belonging, of trust, and relationship. Again, that was back in 2019. And that we have to really move beyond thinking about experiencing work in terms of perks or in programs, and really looking at how does everybody have meaningfulness from their work to their interaction kind of all over the place. Then in 2020, before the pandemic hit, they described a noticeable shift that started to raise the question of, in this technological world, right, how can organizations still remain distinctly human? And really, with the continued rise of the social enterprise, again, they talked about this fusion of technology and humanity, and really calling on organizations to make some bold shifts to create a new sense of purpose, to maximize people's potential, and to have an informed, aligned perspective. And then we all know our world fundamentally changed, right, with the pandemic. And we have this global public health crisis that is still going on 2+ years later. Again, dealing with VUCA to the extreme and all the economic challenges and supply chain issues and everything that is a fallout from what's happened over the last couple of years. And you have an increase in loneliness, and you have an increase in disconnection, and we have an increase in mental health challenges, and people turning health and science into political weapons, and just an increase of divisiveness that happened. And then You layered on top of that the murder of George Floyd and other people of color and an uprising of global social justice crisis. And people are now demanding long overdue change and revisiting outdated systems that perpetuate oppression. And on one hand, there's progress, and these are conversations that have needed to happen, right, to have more equity and inclusion and belonging. And on the other hand, a lot of this change is viewed as a threat by some, and the armor comes up and you see even more divisiveness. And now you have each new shooting and mass shooting and act of violence that keeps happening, and it's triggers and reminders for many groups about how unsafe and unstable and unsettling our world can be. Why this is so important is we cannot ignore the greater context of what has been happening in our world. We have to acknowledge it and include it in our strategies and actions moving forward, because we don't have this nice divide of our personal and professional life. People bring their whole selves into their work each and every day, and all of the stuff that's been happening has a profound impact on what that looks like. So it's not surprising then that 1 year into the pandemic in 2001, when we layered on all these global crises, that there was a shift from focusing on merely surviving to now, okay, what is it going to take to thrive? And echoing Ron Friedman's work back from 2015, they found that organizations must really recognize this inextricable link between our well-being and really both our personal and our professional lives. And as organizations move from survival mode, they have to embrace some core attributes of purpose, potential, and perspective, again, like they found the previous year, to really be able to thrive now and into the future. And also during this time, people started to reevaluate things like what's important to them. What am I willing to put up with? What matters to me? What do I want from an employer? What do I want from my life? Which then brought us to a tipping point, if you will, the Great Resignation or the turnover tsunami, or it's also been called the Great Reshuffle, whatever term you want to use, right? Where people are pursuing pushing out their retirement, and now they're saying, nope, I'm going to retire early. You have people who are changing careers altogether, that are getting out of the workforce. They're really evaluating what they want and making really bold decisions. And so suddenly what you're finding is organizations that have been ignoring the slight temperature increases over the years, right, are now finding themselves like that frog in hot water and suddenly in crisis mode. And what's really interesting is in 2021, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics said that 47 million Americans quit their jobs. And while that seems like, oh my gosh, it's a tipping point, Harvard Business Review suggests that this has actually been happening for quite a long time. Again, it's the frog in room temperature water. And so if you look at this is going back from 2019 or 2009, excuse me. And what you can see is that there has actually been 0.10% increase in quitting or turnover every year. And it's been building and building. In 2020, there was a little bit of a gap because the uncertainty of the pandemic, and it slowed while people were holding on to their jobs, not sure what they were going to do. And so they believe that the increase in 2021 is also just making up for the gap, perhaps, of 2020, and that this increase is not going to let up. And what these authors focus on is they say some of these contributing factors are what they call the 5 R's. And so the first is they say that people are actually retiring in great numbers, but they're not relocating in large numbers. There's not a lot of relocation because many industries and people can now work remote. And some of the big things where we can have an impact as organizations is what they call reconsideration. And people are really reconsidering their work-life harmony. They're reconsidering their care roles. Women are leaving the workforce at 3 times the rate of men. Younger people are leaving the workforce at higher rates than older people. People are trying to cut back hours and switch roles and really trying to find that work-life harmony as they're trying to juggle everything that's going on in the world. Burnout has become noticeable in so many industries, both frontline workers and in technological consulting, et cetera. And we also know that people are, reshuffling. They're shifting industries, they're shifting careers altogether. And then there's a reluctance of, if you're going to force me to go back in the office, do I really want to? Is this what I want for myself? So these are all these contributing factors. Yet here's the interesting thing, is organizations that have been paying attention to the incremental increases, that have understood this data, who have been ahead of the curve, who have been intentional about nurturing these things, are faring far better. They're not completely without their bumps and bruises, but they actually, this isn't impacting them that much. And so why is that? That's really what I want to unpack today. What's the big difference? And what we know now from the Korn Ferry 2022 Future of Work Trends is they talk about there's been a profound shift in power, this tipping point, and they're calling it the era of humanity, which I'm super excited about. And there's been this power shift from hierarchy and a certain group of people holding all the power to really more of a mutual prosperity, right? To this collective perspective versus very me focus. And with that, there's this recognition that lip service isn't going to cut it. You can't have words on a website, but not have that be the reality. Like, people will see through that, cut through that. People want to be treated as human beings, not as part of a machine. And what's really interesting is there was research that was done in MIT Sloan Management Review looking at toxic workplace culture. And what they found is this toxic culture was over 10 times more likely to attribute to people quitting than compensation. So these organizations that maybe are just trying to throw sign-on bonuses or money at the problem is a Band-Aid. It's not getting at the root cause. And some of the biggest contributors to toxic culture are feeling lack of respect. So not having diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and really people feeling flat out just disrespected and not seen as a human being. On the other hand, some ADP research found that companies who feel strongly connected, or employees who feel strongly connected to the company culture, are 75 more times likely to be fully engaged at work versus those who don't. And so if you're taking anything away from this kind of what's been building, is that we cannot keep operating the way we've always operated. And it's like the Einstein quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. There's been a growing demand for more human workplaces, and we have to not be those frogs in boiling water. And so I look at this as not bad news. I look at this as really exciting news because this has been building for such a long time. And yes, we're at a tipping point, but this is such a great opportunity wherever you are on that continuum to look at an intentional, thoughtful, effective reset, right? Because our current climate is exposing organizations to this level of volatility that either we have to choose to adapt, we have to choose to reset, or we're going to be irrelevant. And why I say I think this is a great opportunity is if we're really honest with ourselves, and you look at data even pre-pandemic from Jeffrey Pfeffer and others about workplaces killing us, that normal wasn't working for anything other than a very small minority of very privileged people. We normalize exhaustion, we normalize power differentials, we normalize biases. And so this is a really good opportunity to rehumanize. And so with that, the rest of the time, I want to give you some opportunities to do what I call the rehumanizing reset. What can we do with what's happening in all this data and concretely look for ways that we can create more human, effective workplaces? And so many of you are probably familiar because improving is a huge part of the conscious capitalism movement. But I think we can look to this structure as a way of how do we really elevate humanity through business. So conscious capitalism was started more than a decade ago by John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia, and really looking at, can businesses be a force for good? Can they elevate humanity? Can we really look at a different way of operating that serves everybody versus just a small few? And so it starts with a higher purpose. Do we have a purpose that is bigger than just profit or making money or our products or services? We're up to something bigger than ourselves. And do people feel connected to that? Then we move to stakeholder orientation, viewing all stakeholders as being equally important. So shareholders are just as important as employees, are just as important as your customers, as your suppliers, as the environments you operate within, and the list goes on. That we're not going to do mass layoffs to balance the books and the quarterly returns for our shareholders because that disproportionately disadvantages our employees, et cetera. That we have conscious leadership practices, that we develop everybody to be more self-aware and show up more effectively, regardless of their role, and for formal people leaders that they're really able to nurture and serve the organization in an effective way. And then conscious culture. Are we really intentional about this? And so I'm going to use this as the structure today to look through where there are opportunities to reset at each of these intersections. And here's why. If you're not familiar with the research, if you just look at the publicly traded conscious businesses versus in the US, the S&P 500 stock market index, this is not a typo. Over a 15-year period, they outperformed by more than a 14-to-1 ratio. And at the 10-year mark, they were outperforming at an 8-to-1 ratio. So the gap gets bigger over time. They've also done similar research projects in Brazil and other countries and are finding similar results, so globally as well. So it makes a profound difference. And so as we look at these reset opportunities, in our latest book, Rehumanizing the Workplace, which was published by Conscious Capitalism Press, we describe these, what we call 5 rehumanizing principles. And they're all interconnected, and they really are essential for us navigating this VUCA world to create thriving, future-ready workplaces. And they kind of line up hand in hand with the different principles of conscious capitalism. So I'm going to kind of put these together and connect back to these as we go. So build a lighthouse, the first one, we use to think about what does a lighthouse do? It cuts through the fog. It helps you know where to go in the storms of life in these VUCA waters. And so we really look at that's aligned with the first pillar of conscious capitalism of fostering a higher purpose, right? And it helps us know where to go. It helps provide that groundedness when the world is chaotic around us. And so when we have clarity of our purpose or our why we exist as an organization with what we believe, it becomes like that bright beacon of light coming out of that lighthouse, right? And it helps people have that passion and that emotional attachment to the organization and kind of know how they can fit into the picture. And in a really bold statement back in 2019 at the Business Roundtable event, where CEOs come together, over 200 CEOs finally kind of put their foot down. Now, actions can speak louder than words, but it was a huge move to say that shareholder value is no longer the main objective and that having a higher purpose is essential. Like, this is really, really huge, right? And this isn't just the CEOs of these 200 companies. This isn't just Gen Y and Gen Z. What we know is that it doesn't matter what generational group people are in, that they want to associate with organizations that have that strong sense of purpose. This also kind of gets into that social enterprise. And they want it to be real and authentic, not just empty words on a website or what is sometimes called purpose washing. And what we know that purpose-driven organizations tend to be more agile, they tend to be more unwavering in their commitment and are better able to add value to all their stakeholders. In fact, the latest stats that I read said 2 out of 3 customers are really belief-driven buyers that won't purchase a company's good or services unless they believe in their mission and their purpose. And we also know, speaking of the younger generations, that 64% of Gen Y and 83% of Gen Z will consider a company's purpose and social and environmental values when deciding whether or not to work there. So it matters profoundly. And one of the other things that we need to think about is that in the face of this disruptive change, when people not only feel connected to your company's purpose, but they also are clear on their own purpose and they find fulfillment in their work, they feel their work matters, they're going to be more likely to stay. You're not going to be as hit or dinged, if you will, by this Great Resignation, Great Reshuffle, turnover tsunami. And they're going to also be better performers. And so we want to really think about how can we nurture purpose and fulfillment at that individual level and consistently help them also feel connected to the organization's purpose. We have to connect the dots. For them. And just as a side note, with the interconnectedness between individual health and well-being in the organization, we also know that there's a whole host of individual benefits from having that strong purpose in life. So again, if you have clarity of your company purpose, have you taken it a step further and supported your employees to identify what their purpose is? And then are you finding ways to align, right? Of how can I add value? How can you see how your purpose aligns and fits in with the organization's purpose? So it's a win-win. And besides getting clear on our purpose at the organizational and individual level, we have to go one step further and also make sure that hand in hand with that purpose, that we've operationalized our values. In other words, that we've taken our values from simply professing words that sound nice or sound like a good idea to actually translating them into concrete behaviors where we know they're guideposts. We know when we're in alignment, we know when we're out of alignment, and they serve as how we recruit, how we hire and onboard, how we develop, how we hold one another accountable, and ultimately, if we need to, how we move people out of the organization. We lose all credibility if we don't have clear, specific ways we hold ourselves accountable to, behavioral anchors for how we show up. And this is a step that is so often overlooked, and it creates problems when trying to really live your purpose and can lead to purpose washing. So one of the tangible things I want to give you that you can start doing right now to help keep this alive is storytelling. We like to say that storytelling is what keeps the lighthouse illuminated. So people feel connected to story. We actually know that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts and figures alone. And 73% of successful culture change efforts are surrounding stories and those origin stories. So at the start of your one-on-ones, at the start of your team meetings, if you have a clear company purpose and you have clear values, build 5 minutes into your agenda and just say, who has a recent example of our purpose in action or our values in action? And then what was the impact that had on you? You're trying to get away from generalities to this really personal connection, the heart, the emotions that connects people back into who you are as a company. If you have not done that purpose work, you can kind of back into it by asking the question a slightly different way and just saying, who has a recent example of when you've been really proud to work here? And what's the impact that had on you, right? Or even if you haven't operationalized your values into behaviors, you can say, well, who has an example of our values in action recently? And what's the impact that had on you? So you're starting to kind of get people to attach to that as a filter for how they show up versus it's some nice idea out there. And so again, that's something you can do right now. We have one of our clients that we write about in our book, Harcross Chemicals, that we engage all of their employee owners in a storytelling process to really go, who are you when you're at your best? What is your higher purpose? They're a 100-year-old company. So you're never too old to find your why. You're never too old to clarify this stuff. And what's really interesting is every time we bring their culture ambassadors together, we engage them in a new round of storytelling. Every time we bring their leaders together virtually or in person for some more development work, we engage them in storytelling. And even though it's been really challenging for them during the pandemic, that storytelling kind of boosts them and re-energizes them about what is good and connects them to the heart of the company that is so humanistic, even though there's things that, we all can improve. And their current CEO took over at the start of the pandemic. And he says, had they not done this work, they would be hurting. And that in spite of the challenges of the pandemic, they actually had a record year in 2021, even with supply chain issues, et cetera. So this stuff matters. It makes a big difference, particularly in the long run. So first reset opportunities, start really looking at opportunities to shore up, be clear, and intentionally reconnect people to your purpose and reconnect them to their purpose and kind of find the synergy between the two. The next opportunity for a rehumanizing reset falls into that stakeholder orientation. And we look at this as our rehumanizing principle of create fearless environments. Are we creating a space where people really feel like they can show up, be seen? They don't have to armor up, they can step into that arena. And our principle of find your tribe, which is about seeking out diverse relationships and really using that to usher in change, right? So stakeholder orientation, diverse relationships, it has to be a place where people can enter that arena safely. And so when we look at this, it's really about, are you nurturing psychological safety? Are you minimizing interpersonal fear so that people can show up and share their ideas, share their concerns, give and receive feedback, et cetera? And one of the things that's really cool is that psychological safety and culture, by the way, reside at the local team level. They're not like, oh, we either have it or we don't at the organization. It's team by team. And the formal people leader of that team or the project leader, however you're structured, has the greatest impact on whether or not that is an environment, a community where people feel safe. And so we hear so much about physical safety with the pandemic and with so many different industries, but we forget that psychological safety is the soil for all kinds of industries, all kinds of teams. It is the enabler of effective teams, and it is the gatekeeper of effective teams. When it's absent, it's hard to have anything else. And in fact, if you're not familiar, Google several years ago embarked on a research study for 2 years called Project Aristotle, looking at their most effective teams. And they found psychological safety was the #1 factor. And then when that's present, then it was dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, there's that purpose again, and impact. And when psychological safety was missing, none of those other things were possible. And so I can't emphasize this enough, that in the discomfort of a VUCA world, right, where you inherently are asking people left and right to step into that arena moment after moment, day after day, we have to make it safe for them to do that, right? Otherwise, we have a whole bunch of people armoring up. And we have to be better at managing psychologically safe teams, and we have to look at it. And it's not like a check the box one and done. It's kind of this ongoing, you have to nurture it, right? And again, if we don't want to look dumb, we're not going to speak up. If we don't want to be a burden, we're not going to offer to help, these types of things. And what gets in our way of having psychologically safe teams is what we call impression management, or armoring up. I'm trying to manage how you see me. I'm trying to avoid feeling vulnerable, and it gets in the way. And so when you think of the emphasis that has been placed lately on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we have to move beyond check the box stuff and throwing in an unconscious bias training. It's really about, are we looking at the underlying issues of the invisible people and unheard voices, and really creating a safe space for them to show up and unleash the power and potential of everybody. We have to build DEI into the very fabric of our organization, right? It can't be an extra thing. And we always say that culture is not the CEO's responsibility or the HR person's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility, right? This isn't a solo journey. So same with DEI, this is everybody's responsibility. And so unless we create these psychologically safe places in these environments, like these courageous cultures, and then equip people with the tools to be able to step into that arena without armor, we're not going to get very far. And so again, there are simple things you can do right now to start to look at, how can I start to create that sense of psychological safety around me, right? How can I help my team be a little bit more effective than it is today? And so, looking at things like asking people, what do you need more of or less of me? Or, someone brings something forward and acknowledging, I know this wasn't easy, inviting feedback, asking people what's getting in their way, what support do you need? And truly listening to them, not just jumping in. These are just a smattering of examples of statements or questions you can ask that can give a huge leap forward in starting to build psychological safety. So again, one of the things that we also do, we took a cue from actually Amy Edmondson herself on my team, and we started celebrating what we call F Up Fridays. So every Friday we look back and go, what was your biggest F up or screw up from the week? And what'd you learn from it? So we take it, instead of celebrating the wins from the week, we go, you know what? We learned as much, if not more, from all the ways we misstepped, and let's celebrate it. Let's normalize it. And then let's find the learnings forward. So again, hopefully you can create some deliberate practices to really nurture this idea of falling down, messing, getting back up, being human, and being able to stretch ourselves out of our comfort zone, which gets us into the third opportunity to do a rehumanizing reset, which is really around that conscious leadership pillar. So we've already established that leadership really isn't a title or a role, it's more of a behavior or set of behaviors. And we also know from lots of research that has come out the last couple of years that we can no longer keep reserving development for a select few people. We have to really move from thinking about it as leadership development to people development, right? Are we actually equipping everybody to get to the next level of themselves? And 50% of employees are going to actually need reskilling by 2025. That's just 3 years from now. Half of your employees are going to need reskilling. And that's really at the heart of all that, is going to be the ability to be able to navigate disruption, because it's just going to only get more and more complex and challenging. And so with that being said, we have to understand where we focus our development efforts, or what game of leadership that we are playing. And why I say we want to think about everybody and think about this from leadership development to people development is that the process of developing extraordinary leadership is the exact same process we take to become an extraordinary human being. And so when we look at the inner game of leadership, it's really our emotional intelligence, our internal beliefs, our assumptions, our identity. And it's all the stuff that is really cringy and uncomfortable, right? This is what we call our weight in the messy middle principle. There aren't shortcuts to it, right? There's not a fast forward button. We have to kind of lean in, get uncomfortable, and we have to create fearless environments for people to be able to do that. And then the outer game are our behaviors, our skills, our competencies, and both of these are important, make no mistake. But the inner game runs the outer game. And so what we need to be future ready and have a human focused workplace where people have meaning and fulfillment and feel connected is we have to help people hone their outer game, their behavior, skills, and competencies. But first, it has to be layered on a really strong, solid foundation of an inner game where, again, armor is not necessary. It is not rewarded, right? And people are showing up and stretching themselves and giving their gifts and talents and rising to meet the demands that a VUCA world is asking of us. And so once upon a time, these were called soft skills. And I'm so glad that experts are now calling them essential skills or power skills. And going back to that Korn Ferry 2022 workforce report, they said that learning agility is going to become more important to everyone within the organization, and that leaders with high emotional intelligence are going to be really critical to be able to connect with people on different channels. You can't have high emotional intelligence if you can't show up brave, if you can't lean into vulnerability. They all go hand in hand. And why I think this matters so much is, again, when we step on that arena floor, when we lean into vulnerability that the VUCA world asks of us, it's unsettling. And with all that has gone on in the world and why we have to take in that bigger context, it's not surprising that our brains are kind of shutting down. We can only take on so much. And the rate of change is really rapidly increasing, yet our ability to be able to absorb it is decreasing. Think about that for a second. The world is asking that we can keep managing more and more change, and our biology, our DNA is like, I've had enough. There's too much happening. It's too much. I've got to kind of shut down, if you will. And we know unless we help people, again, reconcile that gap and find a way to lean in, we're not going to get to where we want to go. And so the Korn Ferry report suggests that we have to ensure, and it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have, a must-have that everyone in the organization, not just leaders, is able to show up and handle things in the face of disruptive change. So think about who gets access to development in your organization, and does it focus more on the outer game versus the inner game, and start to really look intentionally at how you are developing your people. And as we think about investing in developing and upskilling and reskilling, notice that the greatest need lies in that inner game of leadership, these emotional and social skills, once thought to be soft, not so much anymore. And we have to develop people's cognitive ability to be able to think better. And so again, talk to people in your organization if you're not responsible for this. Get curious and start asking, what do we have to develop our people? Is it only for executives or high potentials or formal people leaders? Is it primarily focused on the outer game stuff? Are we missing the inner game stuff? Do we need to reorder some things and really start looking at what is it going to take to make sure that you are equipped and equipping people to get to where they want to go? Which gets us to our fourth and final opportunity for a reset, which is around conscious culture. I want to be really clear that these conscious businesses don't leave their culture to chance. They create very deliberate practices around keeping their purpose and their values alive, around who they want to be, around from their hiring to their onboarding and everything in between, of how they run meetings, of how they function, of the reports that they create. I know Improving is a great example of this. They have very deliberate ways how they measure and report on things. Just really learned a lot from them as well. And so we have to start to think of culture as like a garden, that it needs regular tending, right? We can't just leave it to chance. And when we think about what that looks like, one of the free resources that we have that we designed to be a conversation tool that you can download from our website, we call our Thriving Organization Pyramid. And it's really about kind of saying, well, you know what, if our base of our pyramid is strong, We can't ignore it. What are we doing to nurture it and have deliberate practices to keep it strong and keep it alive as we work further up the pyramid? And if we're trying to do work up here and we're struggling and we realize, gosh, we have some holes or we have some gaps down here in like our foundation, maybe we want to temporarily redivert our resources, our time, our energy to shore up the base and then proceed back up there, right? Rather than trying to do everything at once, because we know time and resources are finite. And then we have to build in some accountability around how people show up. And so I would encourage you to use this, look at what deliberate practices do you have to really keep that culture consistent throughout the employee experience, no matter where people are in their life cycle. Which gets us into one last piece, given what's happening in our world and given every day you turn on the news and you hear about mental health crisis and burnout and well-being suffering and all of these things, is making sure that in the context of these 4 rehumanizing reset opportunities, that we are keeping in mind what does it mean within all of that to care for our people as whole beings, not their work person and their personal life is over here, but a whole person, right? We have to address the ongoing stress and fatigue that are happening widespread. We have to address the inextricable interconnectedness of well-being, work, and our personal lives. And what we're hearing from the Korn Ferry report, from the Deloitte report, what you're consistently hearing from these different organizations that survey the landscape of business is that well-being has now become a make or break issue for employees. And why that is because 81% of employees report feeling burned out, whether they're going into an office or not. And we absolutely cannot be using our usual Band-Aid approaches of make people jump through some hoops so they can get an incentive or discount on their insurance premium and it's attached to health risks. That's not what we're talking about. That does nothing to help. In fact, it makes stuff worse. Really, it can't be an afterthought or a program. We really, just like DEI, we have to think about how do we weave well-being into the very fabric of the organization, into the purpose, into the strategy, into our people development strategy, into how we take care of people, into all of our different policies, that it's really part of the people lens of our organization, not a separate program. And why this is so important, if you think about what's gone on over the past 2 years, and now you look at even the last few months, now we've added on this horrific, unjustified war with footage on the TV that some of us are having to explain to our kids, and of people being slaughtered and displaced and just the heartbreak that goes with it. You add on other events, the school shootings, the shootings in the grocery stores, and just it keeps going on. And I know I have an 11-year-old and I'm tired of having these conversations with him and him wondering if the world is a safe place. It's heartbreaking, right? And then you add on the uproar of what's happening, threatening to take away women's reproductive rights. And it's just like a bad game. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. It's like, what's next? And what's happening is there's more and more armor because of this. People are going into reactive mode, self-protective mode. I want to cling tightly to what's safe. And you're ending up with more reactivity, more disconnection, and more frustration and more anxiety. And so if I can leave you with one last thing, is that as we look at these organizational opportunities to reset and create more places for humanity and wholeness and purpose to be nurtured, we also have to make sure that people have a space to be their authentic selves. We have to nurture individuality within that, right? We have to help people get regrounded, find their footing again, normalize what they've been experiencing and feeling as part of being human, and then equip them to be able to reconnect with themselves, their purpose, what matters, and ultimately reconnect with each other so we can have those belonging, inclusive, whole organizations. So hopefully that gives you some stuff to work with. There's my contact info. You will get a PDF of the slides. And so we've got some time, so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Rosie. That was a fantastic talk. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom to enter any questions you may have for Rosie at this time. While we're waiting on questions, I actually had one myself. I saw lots of books referenced throughout the presentation. Are there any that you really recommend that you feel are awesome to kind of dive into and get in depth in some of these topics a little bit more?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm an avid reader. So I would say if you haven't read Conscious Capitalism, the book itself, although even though that came after, I would look at either Conscious Capitalism or Firms of Endearment, which was actually their precursor book. I'll do a shameless plug for our book, Rehumanizing the Workplace, because we go in depth of these 5 rehumanizing principles. I think from like tangible, like here's stuff you can do now and understanding these, those would be potential starting points.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. We did have another question come in. As an employee in an organization, what's the best thing we can do to support our colleagues in our journey together?
I love that. Start having conversations. We talk about this in our Find Your Tribe principle. This isn't a solo journey. Start having conversations like, what are you most excited about? What are you hopeful about? What are you worried about? What discourages you? One of the big learnings that we had when we wrote our latest book was that culture change really starts with one person like yourself, starting to have these conversations and really looking at how you can grow your influence and your impact. And really just, it starts with a conversation. Like, what is that like? Start to show up differently for other people. Maybe advocate for some different practices, simple things you could do. Maybe start having a book club or listen to some podcasts or something, but don't underestimate the power of one person. Think about grassroots organizing. You start showing up differently. You start building relationships and creating energy and excitement with your colleagues about doing things in a better, more intentional, thoughtful way. And it goes a long way.
Perfect. Thank you. That is the last question we have right now. We'll give it one more second. We did have another one just come in. How do you manage when employee goals conflict with each other, i.e. part of the team wants an in-office culture and part of the team wants a completely remote culture?
That's a great question. I think one of it is, I think I would dig into the why and the purpose. So the people that want the remote culture, will help me understand, like, what is it? How does that better? If you go back to the context of the Lighthouse, I always go back to how does this operating in this way help us serve our purpose, serve our values, live our values better? So I would have a conversation using that as your anchor, if you will, of, okay, how does remote serve that better? Like, how does it help us serve that? How does it help us be whole? Like what has been really helpful? What are the great things about it? For those people that want in person, what is great? And can there find some happy medium? I mean, this is where a lot of hybrid environments are coming in, right? And for some, it might be a childcare issue or something else, but can we be creative about the hours or the timing? Maybe it's one day a week, or maybe, what really our need for wanting to come in is really around that human connection. Okay, well then let's look at that. And, maybe we have shorter times we're coming in. I don't know. So, but rather than having it kind of be an us versus them, like very binary, like we're either in or out, lean into curiosity. Tell me more. What is it that is so impactful for you about this, or so important to you about this? Now let's look at how does that help us best serve our purpose, our values, our customers, and then see what comes from that conversation. And that will probably be your guide of kind of maybe what's the next step to take.
I like that, kind of helping each side understand where each other's coming from and themselves in each other's shoes. Yeah. So one other question just came in. When looking at billable time, what are ways we can help our agency, clients or partners, to understand that this kind of energy and intention helps the business and our bottom line?
Yeah. So having been, luckily I own my own firm now and we don't do billable hours like that, but having been on billable hours, I totally understand what that's like. And I think the challenge is that people who are driven by, I got to get the hours and I got to do this and that, they will burn themselves out very quickly. And in fact, what we're seeing is that in consulting firms, in finance and tech, a lot of the younger employees are actually burning out profoundly simply around this issue. So I would say creating norms around we're going to cap X number of billable hours, creating norms around unplugging, creating norms around vacation time. Part of it is kind of really talking to one another. Nope. I know some organizations have gone as far as like, I'm going to take your computer, I'm going to take your laptop, or I'm going to shut off access. I don't think we have to act very paternal about that, but I just think it's really helping people see that going is not necessarily going to be effective. It's counterintuitive, but sometimes pausing, recharging allows us to be more effective. So looking at, can we be more effective, not necessarily work more, and really just be mindful where we spend our time, because that will burn people out. And you see it in all the big consulting houses. People have that grind for 2 to 5 years and they fry and burn out. And so how can we create a different culture and a different experience?
That's great. So that was our last question. So we'll close out there. Thank you, Rosie, for sharing the great rehumanizing reset. That was fabulous talk.